Okay, guys. Welcome to the Basketball Ireland Performance Conference. Today we're going to talk about reconceptualizing youth player development. I'm delighted to have with me Brian McCormick and Mark O'Sullivan to discuss this topic. Brian, would you just like to introduce yourself? Pretty new audience here in Ireland. You haven't been here in a while, so if you'd like to kick us off.
Yeah, sure. Brian McCormick. I coach and write books now in North Carolina. But for the past couple of years, I coached at a junior college in Florida. Before that, I've coached in many different places, including Dublin, Ireland.
Excellent. Mark, you're in virtual Cork. You're a big smile on your face.
Virtual Cork. It's great to virtually be back home. Mark O'Sullivan, originally from Cork. Been living in Stockholm in Sweden since 1994. Presently, I'm head of youth development at AIK Youth Football for the 8 to 12-year-olds, and also help run the research and development department at the club. I think it's probably I think it's Scandinavia's only research and development department in a football club. I'm also doing a doctorate, a PhD in learning designs and reconceptualizing guidance, keep consulting for the Canadian FA. I actually did some work in basketball with the Swedish Basketball Association and various other associations as well. So yeah, it's great to be here. It's winter here. It's been dark since about 3:30, so dark. Apart from the corona, there's even more dark times ahead.
Excellent. So thanks again, guys, for coming on. As we said from the start, the topic is reconceptualizing youth player development. So we only have 30 minutes. It's quite a large topic, but look, the hope is that you guys can give some insights to people. And I suppose nowadays with webinars, seminars, podcasts, and I know, Brian, you mentioned you've written 2 books and you both write blogs, and there's a whole host of information out there. So maybe towards the end you can guide people in the right direction if they like what they hear here today. So I'd just like to start the conversation, I suppose, reconceptualizing youth player development. It's quite topical at the moment, and I know you've both written about it, but just my own background very briefly, and then I'll try and tie my own background into the first question, and then I'll stay out of your way as best I can. But so I'm the head of development for Basketball Ireland, and I also, since January 2014, I'm a development officer in the Cork Sports Partnership. Now I work specific to basketball, but I work in an office with other development officers, who their main job is just to facilitate and support the delivery of physical activity to as many people as possible. So I guess where I'm going is what I've seen over the years, and just, I suppose, with the rise of social media, and we've seen it recently with other NGBs, but just basically clubs, schools, NGBs, sporting organizations, the race to the bottom mindset that exists out there, and essentially, and you've both written about it, but just the adult-driven sports systems that fail to comply with the non-linearity of child and human development. And unfortunately, we're seeing it a lot more, just the elite and win at all costs in the same sentence with children. So I'll start with you, Brian, just to bring the conversation player-centered, and to borrow something from Mark, just with players, as many as possible for as long as possible in the best environment possible. If adopted, what could that vision statement mean?
Yeah, I mean, having experienced basketball in Ireland a little bit for a couple of months, the biggest problem that we had when I was there was participation and building the numbers, within our club, and one of the things that we were trying to do right before I left was coordinate with one of the Gaelic clubs, and with the idea being, that they would come to one basketball practice a week, and then basketball players would go to one Gaelic practice a week, and try to see, what kind of skills cross over between the two, and stuff like that. So in terms of, I know the problem in the States, everything is based around money. So the more that I get my players to specialize, and the earlier I get my players to specialize and come to all my practices and all my clinics and all my, camps, and go to all my games and hire me for personal training and stuff like that, that's just more money that I can make. And so the coaches are really incentivized to convince parents that specialization is necessary and starting early is necessary. And then consequently, the parents want to see some kind of, payoff for that early specialization and for the money that they're paying. And so, the easiest way to show some kind of payoff is to win games, or, to go to sponsored tournaments or to go to national championships, et cetera, et cetera. And so when you're not doing those things, then parents start to, well, what am I getting for the money that I'm spending and the time that we're spending? And so then they look elsewhere, for a bigger club or, a coach with, more name recognition or whatever it is that's going to satisfy their, their kind of needs. And so, I imagine the incentives are different, outside the United States than they are, here, because of the different manners in which we organize sports. But, from my perspective, that's one of the things that I argue. I like, what Mark has to say, and have, used it, across my writing since I first heard it, going back, several years. So, but I think, from a development standpoint, within a sport, the goal should be to increase participation first. And the way that we're going to increase participation, hopefully, is to create, a positive, good experience for all the players. And there's different ways that you can do that, kind of depending on ages, but very few players, when they're entering sports, let's say they're entering into an organized atmosphere at, 7, 8, 9 years old, very few of the actual participants are motivated by winning. Obviously most people prefer to win than to lose, but that's generally not going to be their biggest determinant of whether they enjoy the experience or whether they want to persist, they want to continue in that experience. Generally they're going to be, more interested in, for children of that age, especially, it's going to be a social experience. They want to play with their friends. They want to meet new friends. They want to get exercise. They want to learn something. And so the best approach to me is creating environments that, meet these needs, as they say now, the biopsychosocial needs of each athlete, and create a deeper or a broader number of participants. And then, as people get older and competitions grow stiffer, then you'll see who really wants to persist and wants to invest the time necessary to become a quote unquote elite player, once they hit their late teens and 20s. But I think the focus on trying to create elite players at 8, 9, 10 years old, just ends up being a road to nowhere.
Brilliant. Mark, do you want to follow in there? Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, I think Brian has really touched on quite a broad range of things there. I mean, as you mentioned in your introduction, you were highlighting how many player development models in youth sport are based on the presumption that learning, development, performance are linear and predictable processes. And this has led to a lot of misconceptions regarding the learner and the learning process. And in my opinion, it's been undermining player development and many player development programs in many sports. Now, sorry, I just dropped my phone. So what, when you think there, what Brian was highlighting on was about results. So one of the big misconceptions in youth sport there with young people would be that we're mixing up performance with learning. We're assuming they're the exact same thing, and they're not really. Learning is retention and transfer, and it's over time, whereas performance fluctuates and is very, very intermittent. But we're really, one of the misconceptions of this, what I call the pyramid model, this linear model, is that performance gets confused and mixed and conflated with learning. And you've probably read now, even today now in the Irish Examiner, it was Ciaran Shannon's piece on this document brought forward by the Football Association of Ireland. Again, that's based on this standard model of talent development, which is a standard pyramid structure. And really it's just, and when you refer to, but other countries do it and it works here, it's like, that's just survivorship bias. Really, that's all it is. It's, if you're like, basically, all I can say about that is that talent is the graveyard of evidence. Nobody sees the dead bodies. All you're looking at is the survivors of the system. And that's not a healthy way at all to run or inform youth sport. And then within all this, and this has been highlighted by the International Olympic Committee in their 2015 consensus statement, within this culture, there's been this mass media attention, the sensationalization of youth sport. There has been kind of parental pressures. And then somewhere in there, we have the language. So if you are using the word talent, elite, like talented elite children, or like elite children are referring to an elite 12-year-old or an elite 10-year-old or your elite team for 10-year-olds, then you're contributing to this culture. You're contributing to these misconceptions. You're contributing to this linear culture, presuming that learning and development is predictable and a linear process. And I think that's kind of possibly maybe in another way, just really repeating what a lot of Brian is saying. But like this word elite has created this mythological kind of culture around what child youth sport looks like. And then you've 8 and 9-year-olds competing, to be that for elite places and elite environment. And really all we're looking at is this selection and deselection, because that's what it's about. You get these kids coming in at 8 and 9 into sports programs. They're told they're the best, and within a year or two, most of them are gone. There's other people coming in and out. And we've another problem there, is that we have children identifying themselves around this. They're wearing a badge of a certain academy, and that's almost forming their identity. But that's because the culture drives us, and the words we use, words like associating talent with 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds, this is driving this kind of whole mythological process within child youth sport. And then with these badges that the kids wear, that's just really, in my opinion, a psychological ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
So that's just basically summing up what Brian has said in some way, I guess. If Brian has anything to add, it'd be great.
I'm good.
No, that was really good. It's, and you've touched on a broad range of things there. Mark, I heard you speak a few years ago in CIT at the MSAI conference, and one example you gave was, some of these elite, when they're looking to give children trials, talent ID sessions, etc., and they're asking for soccer positions on the field, and you were saying that your son's favorite position is in the middle of a set of Lego.
That was for 5-year-olds. That was a Premier League club in England. Trials for 5-year-olds.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. Like, obviously, there's discrepancy between the NGBs from schools, from clubs. What are some of the solutions do we need people like yourselves? Do we need the researchers to get into those admin roles? How do you see it changing, or can it change?
Brian, I think it's kind of a two-way thing, really, Brian. Would you agree with me here when I say that it's not just up to the NGBs and the clubs, it's also up to the academics, because there is clearly an issue with this, with knowledge transfer. You have academic stuff being written for academics, and administrators for administrators or something. It's, you know what I mean, Brian? So I think we need probably more. I would say a first step for me would be, if you want to have evidence-informed approaches, is that the coach educators. So you need somebody to educate the coach educators who are going out meeting people to initiate discussions, because you can't go in telling people this is wrong, you're not to do this. You need to initiate and very enriched discussions around this, and you have to have highly skilled coach educators to do this. What do you think, Brian?
I mean, again, speaking from the American's perspective, I think like you said, there's a number of problems, and the biggest thing that I see is the people that get into the kind of coach education roles are quote unquote, ex-coaches or successful coaches. And so they are then disseminating what worked for them, which, if I was successful in the late 90s and now I've retired and now I'm the coach educator, well, I'm talking about or teaching ways that we used 20 years ago, which hopefully over the last 20 years we've learned something new and we've changed approaches, and there's new insights and new ways to run practices, new ways to communicate. We're dealing with different generation of children and athletes, so there has to be some adaptation. That some things are timeless, I think, but I think also we have to adjust to who we're coaching, and how we're coaching. And so,
But that's my point.
I
think there's a position here for educating coach educators. I think is a very, very important thing. And so, but then we're back to the thing is like the language. How do we work with this? Because I'm quite astounded how many like NGVs I've been around to work with. They have coach educators who have absolutely no idea of anything to do with learning and even a simple theory of learning, theories of motivation. And this is quite problematic for me, because then when you have discussions about ability grouping, should we have ability grouping? Should we select early? Should we do this? All these discussions really will stay the same if you say we should and I say we shouldn't. That's the end of the discussion, But really, it should be okay if I ask you, Brian. So then, Brian, if you believe in not ability group, if you believe in avoiding early selection, or if you believe in early selection, what's your understanding of human development and learning? That should be the starting point of all these discussions. Because then I think once we have that as a starting point, we don't talk about ability grouping. We don't talk about early selection because we're more informed and we can make more informed decisions, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I'm talking, I guess I'm looking at it from the skeptic standpoint that, especially here, people within sport don't trust an academic or an educator. They, if and I see it every time, like, when I do clinics or whatever, whoever, the biggest name is coach at a clinic, that's how you sell people on coming to a clinic. If you tell a group of coaches, well, we're going to have this PhD in coach education come and talk about, human development and child development within a sports landscape, you're not going to get anybody to turn out. But if you have an MBA coach come and talk about baseline out of bounds plays, you're going to get a full house.
Of course.
And then they call that coach education. I know I'm no longer involved with USA Basketball. I spoke at one of their conferences one time, and it was supposed to be, working towards some kind of coaching license, but I just reflected that they let me speak on whatever I wanted to speak on. They let all the speakers, speak on whatever they wanted to speak on. And then you have, all the conferences at different locations that all have different coaches speaking. And so I'm like, well, how can this be a license or be termed even coach education when it's 100% dependent on whoever shows up to present at that one conference, what you're going to get. So you add, you look at the topics of various things, and almost all of them are, tactic related. So I'm going to teach my zone defense. You're going to teach your press. Somebody else is going to teach out of bounds plays. Somebody's going to teach how to, teach man-to-man defense. And there's no discussion of learning, feedback, practice design, constraints, all these things that are related to just coaching. It's just the specifics of, where do I put my elbow when I shoot the ball? And then we're going to have an hour-long discussion about the specific ideal technique for shooting a basketball. And then the next person is going to have an hour-long discussion on, which foot to use first when you're closing out to a offensive player. and we're getting into the absolute minutiae of technical skills, and we're missing the greater general philosophy of coaching and of putting together a team and putting together practices. But we do
Brian,
that because that's what the coaches want.
But Brian, is not just a result of this culture I was referring to. That's also being exposed by the International Olympic Committee consensus statement. It's a kind of a clickbait culture. Here, come here, and I'll show you how to do this baseline, whatever, or like what foot to turn on, and and that's what it is. It is a clickbait coaching culture, because people want this instant hit, and and there's very little room for probably like meaningful discussions about who are these individuals we're working with, how do humans learn, and how can I help the learner in the learning process. I think that's really where we need to go back to, because a lot of these discussions and I think a lot of the issues can be dealt with on a more informed level if we start from that space, as opposed to the ability grouping, yes, no, early selection, yes, no. So I completely agree with you. Yeah,
brilliant. Thanks, guys. That was exactly. I think people listening will get a lot out of that, and repeated viewings. So just on your point, yeah, no, that's it. Let's buck the trend. So let's not. I was going to ask you for your favorite sideline out of bounds, Brian, but let's talk about constraints-led approach. So just, I think we've answered. You've answered a part of this in the opening question, but we think we understand as non-linear representative task design, repetition or repetition, etc. Mark, I'll go to you first. Why are there so many misconceptions and confusion around the constraints-led approach?
Well, I would think that it's probably partially because of the language it's cloaked in, and also I think maybe, as I said, some of the academia hasn't, and also coaches just rushing to make interpretations as well. So it's somewhere in the middle lies the problem. So at AIK, at my club, we're encouraging coaches to adopt a constraints-led approach. And it's kind of important that you start where people are at, not where you want them to be, because I'm dealing with coaches with pro licenses all the way down to parent coaches. So how I would introduce and conceptualize constraints-led approach for them would be, I like this idea of learning in development, not learning and learning in. Learning happens in the midst of developmental changes. Those development changes are in the brain, in the body, in the environment, at the levels of society and culture. So learning happens in developmental changes. And learning is what the individual does about these changes. So there you have, within that, you've got the individual in an environment learning a task. So that's how I try to concept, because the constraints-led approach really explains learning of skills, the emergence of skills, where they come from. So, for example, I did a long interview with Pavel Datsyuk, Pavel the Magic Man Datsyuk, one of the best ice hockey players of the last 25, 30 years. He's Russian, and I got it done in Russian and got a translator to do it. It's because I didn't want to miss any nuances. And he spoke to me very simple about how his unusual style that people had difficulty reading in the NHL, and where did it come from. And when we asked him about his childhood, it was quite a poor area of Russia. So, and it was in the 80s, the Soviet area, and if you broke your stick, you could be waiting a few weeks before you get a new one. So he learned to play ice hockey protecting the stick and the puck. So he developed this very unorthodox style under the socio-cultural constraints of poverty. Now, that's how he adapted to it. So his whole style is an emerging feature of his socio-cultural background, basically. And he still used the least amount of sticks in the NHL and never scored a goal using a slap shot. And and this is his own word. So there you have it again. That's learning in development, and the development changes are also in society at the level of culture. So that was just I'm sure there's millions of examples in basketball. So just constraints-led approach helps us understand how skills emerge, the learning of skills. And this idea of learning happening in development, I think, is a good and rich way to explain it to coaches and people at all levels that learning happens in the midst of developmental changes, and these development changes are over multiple time scales at different levels. And then if you want to get into practice, then of course, how we work with it in practice, yes, the word nonlinear pedagogy puts around, but as I've spoken with Brian already about this, we've adapted that again, a model to try and explain to coaches at all levels. So to cover the principles, like you said, some of them already: representative task design and repetition without repetition. I ask coaches to plan their practice, observe their practice, and reflect on their practice on ideas like ball, opponents, direction, consequence, and information in what is happening is representative of the game. So in the design. Now, so you have a ball, you have an opponent, you have direction. So there is somewhere to go. Consequence: if you lose the ball, the opponents might score or get a point or do something. And the information is representative. This means that, so you can still have ball, opponent, direction and consequence, but if you have this rule where everyone must touch the ball before they score, then that's not representative information, because they're not acting on information that's representative of the real game. So that's how I explain the principles of nonlinear pedagogy. So again, we're trying to translate the language. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Brian, on this.
Well, I can, try to make it a little bit more basketball specific for the specific audience, if you will. And so basically the idea being that, we'll use shooting because this tends to be the one that's most contentious. Whether you should simply do a traditional block shooting drill where I'm going to shoot, Mark's going to rebound for me, he's going to pass me the ball, and I'm going to shoot until I make 10 or 15, 20 shots. That is not obviously including a defensive player, and there's no information there that will be, present during the games, and there's no real consequences, as Mark said either. And so the difference being, and I got this from Finnish coach Harry Manninen, talks about, for it to be a game-like shooting drill, there has to be a choice or a passing option, and there has to be a defensive player there. So at minimum to be a game-like drill, you need 3 players. Because and people, will say, well, but, you need repetitions. And I know that this weekend I was getting hounded on Twitter by multiple people, including an NBA shooting coach, telling me how wrong I was. But you get players who are shooting above 80% in practice, NBA players, they're shooting over 80% in practice, and then they go out and they shoot 30% in games. And to me, a major reason why is because the skill that they're practicing is not the skill that's used during a game. And people say, well,
informational constraints aren't representative.
Yeah, exactly. They'll say, well, yeah, it is. You're shooting, I'm shooting a 3-pointer, so the distance is the same. So it's a game-like shot. I'm running into it, or I'm coming off a curl cut, just like I would in my offense with my team. That's game-like. But when I catch and shoot in a drill with no defense and Mark's just passing me the ball, I know that I'm shooting the ball. I don't have to think about or look at or worry about anything else other than catching and shooting. Whereas in a game, even if we're running a play to get me the ball for me to shoot because I'm the best player on the team, I still have to consider how much space I have between the defensive player that's guarding me. Is the defensive player guarding the screener hedging out on me? Do I have a teammate that's more open under the basket that maybe I should catch and pass the ball? All these things ultimately are going to affect, the decision to shoot. And then once I decide, it doesn't matter, regardless of how open I am, I'm shooting the ball. Just the proximity of having a defensive player is going to actually change the actual biomechanics of the shot, beyond just what the decision is going to be. So there's the information that's available there in a regular, quote unquote, block practice shooting drill isn't the same as what's there in a game. And the evidence, if we needed any, is that the percentages dip by 2 times, and people say, well, yeah, but that's because you're playing in a game. Of course, your percentages are going to go down in a game. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you're not practicing the same thing. Because the goal in a game is performance. So my goal in a game should be to shoot the absolute highest percentage possible. Whereas, as Mark was alluding to, my goal in practice is learning. My goal isn't necessarily to shoot the highest percentage possible in practice. Because if I'm shooting 80% in practice and I'm shooting 30% in games, I'm doing the wrong thing. I'd rather shoot 35% in a game and 50% in practice than 80% in practice and 30% in a game. Ultimately, my performance is measured during the games, not during practice. But we've created this environment where, we want players to make every shot in practice, and then we'll accept that they're only going to make half those shots in a game because, well, there's a game there. And there's all these different things in the game. And kind of what Mark and I are alluding to is all those different things in a game that affect the shooting percentages. Those are the things that need to be included in practice. Mark?
Very good. Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm really happy Brian covered it in basketball terms to me, because I'd end up using all the wrong word. Although I can tell you this, Brian, at AIK, the kids, they came up with the word point guard for support behind. So we have target point guard in games. So target is to play forward. So we are very simple principles. Can you play through, around, or over? And then we also, can you create a target player and a point guard player for the player in possession? So there's always support in front and behind as well. It's really fascinating. So we've actually, the kids themselves stole a word from basketball. That is funny. That was very good.
Mark, just last thing, we're running out of time. That flew, but just with your own sessions in AIK, and I'll ask Brian the same as quick as you can. Is there any part of the session that's unopposed? Is there always a defender in the way? Is there any isolated drills, or is that forbidden at this stage?
Well, the thing is, I can assure you, in the 8 to 12, we don't have any ladders. I've been very, very, very successful in removing them, and have been given anybody wanted to use them got very clear scientific evidence why you shouldn't use them. So we've removed a lot of them. And so, I mean, for me, I can't go into pairing. In general, I can tell you we don't have isolated practice in general that way. But I never say not to do it either, because I think that's, again, the wrong approach. So I usually speak to them, say, at one end you have isolated practice, at the other end you throw the ball and let them play. Probably neither are perfect for a practice environment with a coach. So it's this landscape, we call it the affordance landscape, opportunities for action landscape in the middle that we try to work along. And I try to encourage coaches to work around there. Now, of course, then in older ages, when maybe the day after a game, a recovery session, or the day before a game, there might be some ice because you want to minimize contact. Again, it's very context dependent, but I don't think you really need it when you're working with young learners. I don't feel myself I need it, but I can criticize somebody at the club that uses it maybe to start the training sessions or something for a few minutes. I have to be very careful with that as well, but we try to encourage them. But in general, I can say we follow the Foundations for Task Design model, which is ball, opponent, direction, consequence, and information in practice, representative information in a competitive environment.
Brian, just to put a basketball context on it, so you have your warm up, and then as Mark alluded to, just on that continuum of isolated, deliberate practice right up to scrimmaging, as we call it in basketball. Is there a sweet spot for us as basketball coaches? Where do you like to operate on that, I suppose, learning continuum?
I mean, when I coached younger players, especially, we rarely used isolated practice at all. Everything was hopefully somewhere in the middle, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, adding in different types of, constraints to kind of focus the learning on what we wanted to learn on. At the college level, similar to what Mark was saying, we would use some isolated drills either as a warm-up. occasionally, or especially on days before a game. And typically, for the most part, we were trying to, develop confidence in that case. Going into a game, we want to feel good about ourselves. We want to feel confident. So we want to make a lot of shots as opposed to having a defensive player there and lowering the percentage. I just want players to see the ball go through the net. So, like Mark was saying, there's different reasons why you might use a drill, and typically when we're discussing these things, we're talking about the best way to learn, the best way to develop players, and so on and so forth. But there's always different reasons why you could use a drill. I mean, with young players, you might use a drill that they find is fun, just because it's going to be fun for the players. It's going to keep them interested, involved, and they may need that, depending on the age and maturity and so on and so forth. Even at the college level, I mean, we'll try to throw in fun things. Most of the fun things that I throw in tend to have some kind of opposition, play tag games and stuff like that. But there's a different reason beyond just specifically learning why we might use a drill, and developing confidence, especially day before a game. That's another reason to use an isolated drill. So I would agree that with Mark that, the majority of our practice is going to be focused somewhere between, isolated and just rolling the ball out and letting them play. But there are times where I'm going to use, something just to have some fun, or something just to build confidence, depending on what I see the players need.
Guys, just to finish it up, Brian, I know you've written a few books. Is there anything you'd like to plug, or where people, this might be a new audience for you, just where they can find you and learn more about the stuff you've spoken about this evening?
Yeah, I mean, Twitter is probably the best place to find me, at Brian McCormick. And most of my books, I think all my books now are available on Amazon. So, Crossover, Evolution of 180 Shooter, Fake Fundamentals, 21st Century Basketball Practice, books like that. If you Google it, or if you search any of them on Amazon, you should be able to find them.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. Mark, do you have any new albums, any good music to recommend?
I've loads of, as I said, I did a rugby podcast recently, and I recommend go on to Spotify and look up Salt, SAULT. Okay. Utter class.
I'll check that out. I thought you were going to recommend the Nun Attacks or something like that.
The Nun Attacks. Yeah. The Sultans. Where's my jumper?
Brilliant.
Actually, the drummer lives here near me. So that's fun. Yeah. I just say, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, my email is mark.kss@gmail.com, or they can follow me on the Twitter sphere at Mark MarkStKHLM. You can find me under Mark O'Sullivan on Twitter. And if they just want to get in touch and I can send them the research papers that I've been involved in, that I've written, or stuff. If they want to find out more about what we talked about, I can share some material with people. No problem.
Excellent. Guys, really appreciate it. Thanks a million. And we'll talk to you soon. All the best.
Well, thanks.
Take care.